Very distinguished guests and members of media, a very good morning and salam bersih to everyone. On behalf of the Penang Institute, as well as the State Government of Penang, allow me to start by wishing everyone a warm welcome, both to Penang, as well as to the inaugural conference of the ASEAN Coalition of Clean Governance. Organizing a conference in the midst of the month-long internationally renowned Georgetown Heritage Fest, with the theme of this conference, What Enables Clean Governance in Democracies, ASEAN's Perspectives, is appropriate. After all, Georgetown's future as a UNESCO World Heritage City is inextricably intertwined with its survival link to clean governance. Clean governance is an issue that is very close to my heart. It is one of the reasons why I'm here as the Penang Chief Minister, and one of the critical reforms in my administration which will decide whether I will still be around. Therefore, it is important to understand the correlation between development and clean governance. History is rife with numerous examples throughout the world where weak governance, corruption, and abuse of power have resulted in grinding poverty and a widening wealth inequality and income disparity. When a government is corrupt and inefficient, it is almost a certainty that its economic development will be unbalanced, inequitable, and even unfair, with its socio-economic distribution skewed in favor of the cronies. Clean governance can be broadly defined as a system that ensures policies are made for public interest through the essential mechanism that establishes institutions which builds integrity in leadership and decision-making, and effective internal control to check and punish corruption, as well as rewarding whistleblowers. More specifically, we need to understand whether clean governance is relevant in the ASEAN context to engender social, political, economic, and sustainable development. It is for this reason that the Penang Institute has organized this conference today by bringing together leading proponents of clean governance from around the region with the aim of raising awareness of clean governance, discussing its enabling factors, setting up institutions, exchanging experience, and more importantly, establishing a culture of clean governance throughout ASEAN. We are gathered here in extraordinary times. The global picture today is one that would have been unrecognizable just a decade ago. Today, we see totalitarian governments and once untouchable dictatorships being toppled one after another like dominoes. And we are very pleased to see the first democratically elected president of Egypt. Meanwhile, the Western economies are teetering on the edge of a meltdown, consumed by the weight of a crunching debt crisis that offers little room for optimism. We may live in extraordinary times. The effects of the global economic crisis are already obvious. ASEAN economies will not be spared, and is expected to face weakening exports and a slowdown in FDIs. As a result, economic management has become an increasingly challenging effort. In these extraordinary times, some say we require extraordinary ideas or extraordinary efforts. However, I feel that we should not forget that the return to the basic principle of not just doing the right thing, but doing it right, I think is important. ASEAN countries are bound together not only by geography and economy, but also by cultural and political values. In that sense, this great economic challenge that we are facing is a collective dilemma and must therefore be met by collective leadership and action. When I talk about leadership, I'm not only talking about economic leadership. While that is important, I'd like to suggest there is also a need for ethical leadership. In other words, the only way to ensure protection for the people is to ensure that public institutions are strong, resilient, and most importantly, clean. The pillar of a society is in its public institutions, which can be defined as the rules of the game, which govern the interaction within and between governments, markets, and society. Imagine if the rules of the game were not firm, or if the enforcement of these rules were lax. You will find irresponsible parties taking advantage of the system to enrich themselves, and worse, suppress the rights of others. That is how a corrupt and oppressive society is formed. Former World Bank President James Wolfensohn summarized it well by saying, "The causes of financial crisis and poverty are one and the same. If countries do not have good governance, if they do not confront the issue of corruption, if they do not have a complete legal system which protects human rights, property rights, and contracts, their development is fundamentally flawed and will not last." In other words, the relationship between public institutions and the socio-economic development of a society is a symbiotic one. Good and clean governance will result in a positive socio-economic development. Conversely, ineffective public institutions and weak governance will facilitate corruption, misguided allocation of resources, arbitrary justice, and excessive government intervention. This will in turn reduce economic competitiveness, deter private sector investment, and prejudice the distribution of wealth. True development is not merely material, but must also refer to the accessibility and availability of opportunity to a society. In other words, a truly developed society is one where its people are empowered with the freedom to fulfill their aspirations. In this, I am guided by the great economist for the poor and the economic Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, who questioned the fundamental assumption of development economics by arguing that development should not be measured primarily by wealth or income. According to Sen, poverty is not merely material, but should also be seen as the deprivation of basic capabilities, which he defines as human freedoms. In other words, development is a process of expanding the instrumental freedoms of individuals, which he describes in 5 elemental forms. 1. Political freedoms. 2. Economic freedoms. 3. Social opportunities. 4. Transparency guarantees. And lastly, protective security. Political freedoms encompasses basic human rights, such as freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and freedom of information. It also significantly refers to public participation, checks and balances, the need for democratically elected bodies at all levels, as well as institutional respect for the rule of law. Economic facilities are defined as the availability of access to economic resources, markets, and as well as female participation in the workforce, while social opportunities refer to education, health, and other community facilities that allow individuals to gain better agency. Transparency guarantees are meant to ensure a mechanism for seeking justice, the prevention of corruption, abuse of power and conflict of interest through public disclosure of information. And finally, protective security talks about the need for the state to provide a social safety net to mitigate deprivation and poverty caused by epidemics, natural disasters, and war. These 5 forms of human freedom described by Sen are complementary and interrelated concepts that encompasses processes as well as opportunities. They are both a fundamental aspect as well as an enabler to achieve development. In other words, they are not only the means, but also the ends. We must understand that Sen's hypothesis is centered on the idea that freedom is development. By providing the instruments of freedom to an individual, we will enhance the ability of individuals to fulfill their own potential and capabilities. It is in this collective empowerment of individuals that will in turn lead our societies to true development. If we make development our objective, and we recognize that freedom is both the means and the ends to development, then it follows that we must build public institutions that embrace the universality of truth, accountability, and transparency. After all, sets parameters of human freedom, entails the fulfillment of basic human rights, political equality, socio-economic justice, equitable access to opportunity, fairer distribution of wealth, integrity in leadership, and commitment to the rule of law. The only way to crystallize these parameters of freedom is to institutionalize them through the instruments of democracy. In other words, freedom can only be granted and protected by a clean, efficient, accountable, and transparent public institutions. Our hence like to suggest that public institutions should conform to a universal framework of good governance, as suggested by the United Nations Development Programme, which contains 5 principles: 1, legitimacy and voice; 2, direction; 3, performance; 4, accountability; and lastly, fairness. It is critical that public institutions must be democratically legitimate and participatory in nature. All men and women should have a voice in decision making, either directly or indirectly. Such participation can only be built by honouring basic rights such as freedom of association and speech. At the same time, governance must be guided by a strategic vision that is both forward-looking and cognizant of the complexities of its local history and society. Institutions and processes must also be robust and responsive in order to serve its stakeholders effectively. Importantly, it must be both accountable and transparent. Lastly, governance of public institutions must be fair and provide equality regardless of gender or skin color. Above all, it is imperative that institutions are guided by rule of law. However, we must ensure that the law is responsive to freedom, justice, and the tenets of human rights. These 5 UNDP principles of good and clean governance must act as our guide if we wish to achieve development without compromising on freedom and democracy. In this regard, Penang's commitment towards clean governance is exemplified by CAT of competency, accountability, and transparent administration. CAT has managed to arrest the graceful decline of Penang over the 18 years prior to 2008. Based on CAT principles, we became the first state in Malaysia to introduce open competitive tenders for all public procurements and supplies. To the outside world, this is the norm. But in Malaysia, it is ground-shattering. We were immediately subject to a barrage of criticisms from various quarters who felt that their rice bowls were threatened. And of course, the cronies always have the loudest voice. But we persevered, and by implementing open competitive tenders, we effectively eliminated the opportunity for corruption. Previously, contractors had to seek out middlemen for projects. Now everything is done online through our e-procurement system in the internet. Where previously the road to a government contract required political connections, now it only requires an internet connection. And at the same time, to make sure that the internet connection is readily available, no blockage, no breakdowns, the Penang has also supplied free Wi-Fi in public places. So for our guests, you can enjoy the facility of free Wi-Fi in public places. Now, in addition, we also disclose fully the contents of government contracts signed with the private sectors. We have also passed the Freedom of Information Act, which allows disclosure of government contracts for public scrutiny. What's more, we have also taken steps to engage the public on the state government's proposed projects and plans. To top it all, we have become the first state in Malaysia to have the state government ministers as well as the chief minister, that's myself, publicly declare our assets. And if you are keen to know how many houses and cars I own, go to our website and you can see me naked financially. More recently, we have sought to empower more decentralized decision making by passing the local government elections enactment as part of a commitment to restore local government elections. Our efforts are bearing fruit. In the last 4 years, we have turned the state finances around with surplus budgets for every single year since we took office. More importantly, in an era of high debts, we have successfully reduced state government debt from 630 million when we took over. We have reduced it by 95% to only 30 million ringgit today. For all our efforts, we have garnered accolades not only from Auditor General's annual reports, but also have become the only state government to be praised by Transparency International. However, praise alone does not mean anything if it is not translated into real achievements. For the first time in history, in Penang, we managed to become the #1 investment location of the country in 2010. And we repeated that in 2011 for the first time in 55 years. 2 years running, we are #1 in terms of investments. And over the last 2 years, our contribution to Malaysia's FDI is 30%. For a state with only 6% of the country's population, we punch above our weight. We are also pleased that Georgetown is now the most livable city in Malaysia. We beat Kuala Lumpur in 2011, and to prove that it was no fluke, we followed up by repeating this feat this year, 2012. Last but not least, CAT governance is not only about clean governance, but also about providing democratic space and fostering a culture of freedom. We have established the first Speaker's Corner in Malaysia, not in one location, but in 2 locations, one on the island and the other on the mainland, where one can not only enjoy freedom of speech, but also freedom after speech. More importantly, we also believe that it is incumbent upon the state to provide economic facilities and social opportunities for the people. As such, we embark on a string of people-centric social welfare programs that have seen Penang become the first state in Malaysia to eradicate hardcore poverty. And we are well on our way to wipe out poverty completely by 2015. In addition, we also go to great lengths to ensure that the downtrodden are taken care by giving cash aid to senior citizens, single mothers, the disabled, school children, newborn babies, subsidized dialysis treatments, and even free bus services in the inner city areas and across the Penang Bridge. This is all part of our commitment to ensure that our people enjoy freedom from want. It is my hope that our conference today will mark the beginning of a strong movement for clean governance in ASEAN. It is especially important in current times to ensure clean governance of our public institutions and freedom of our people can be solidified. To do this, we must be aware of the collective aspirations of our people. We must be responsive to their needs and engage them on their wants. Above all, freedom must be institutionalized. And so at the end of today's proceedings, we hope to launch an important document titled the Penang Declaration to symbolize the aim and purpose of the coalition, the ASEAN coalition of clean governance. This is a document that symbolizes the commitment of all the participants here today in acknowledging the principles of clean, accountable and transparent governance and the universal values of truth, freedom and democracy. It also recognizes the need for clean governance and the rule of law in order to attain social economic development and progress, as well as the need to build public institutions. The Penang Declaration will reaffirm the 5 principles of good governance as described by the UNEP, as well as to encourage the implementation of public declaration of assets by leaders, open competitive tenders, and the disclosure of government contracts. Perhaps significantly, the document will also call for an important element of the anti-corruption process, which is the need for whistleblower protection. In addition, our coalition will also bear no tolerance for corruption and abuse of power by insisting that powers of prosecution in corruption cases must be independent, wielded, and not subject to ministerial oversight. Finally, the Penang Declaration is a pledge to embrace cultural and social transformation in governance and integrity to a gender-inclusive, equitable, and participatory social, political, economic development for the people in ASEAN. Ladies and gentlemen, the Penang Institute would like to thank everyone for attending the day's proceedings, especially our distinguished speakers who have come from far. We have guests from Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, Philippines, and others. It's indeed a proud day for Penang and the Penang Institute. This idea was suggested by me when I met the former Prime Minister of Thailand when I visited him in Bangkok in the Thai Parliament. And I'm very pleased and grateful that the former Prime Minister, His Excellency Abhisit, immediately accepted my proposal and graciously accepted my invitation to come and speak at this conference, the inaugural coalition, the ASEAN Coalition of Clean Governance. And we are honored to listen to him give the keynote address at dinner tonight. I'm certain that everyone here shares our desire for improvement in governance, and I hope that the establishment of this ASEAN Coalition for Clean Governance will be the first step of a collective journey towards this ideal. As such, I thank you all once again for taking this important step with us. And in this respect, whilst public oversight is important, as I mentioned earlier, in extraordinary times, sometimes we do not need to do extraordinary things, but just to go back to basic. Not only do the right thing, but do it right. And in that respect, when you talk about integrity and clean governance, you must not only do the right thing when people are watching you, you must also do the right thing when people are not watching you. And this is what we hope to create in the culture of clean governance. That leaders will do the right thing when people are watching you. But even when the people are not watching them, they will also do the right thing. Let us together face the scourge of corruption and abuse of power by advocating, encouraging, and implementing clean governance. We do this because it is our duty and responsibility. In the words of Edmund Burke, the only thing necessary for a triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And remind ourselves also that cleanliness is next to holiness. With that, I wish all of you a happy conference and salam bersih to all.
President Officer of Penang Institute, the chair for this session. Would you please take the stage together with our respected speaker, Dr. Ambida Srinivasan, coach.
Go back a long way.
Nice to see you. Good morning, sir. It's been a while, huh?